September 1958. Monte Vista, Colorado, a potato farm in the San Luis Valley, 22 miles south of town on the Alamosa County Road, where the valley floor is so flat and so wide that you can see the weather coming from 50 miles away, and there is nothing to do but watch it arrive. The pen is already on the table. Here is the story. Agnes Delaney had been on that land for 26 years, which means she had been on it long enough to have planted the first row of potatoes herself. In the spring of 1932, when the soil of the San Luis Valley was still new to her, and the air at 7,000 feet still surprised her lungs in the cold mornings. She had come from Kansas with her husband, Francis Delaney, who had heard that the valley ground was deep and fertile, and that a man willing to work it could make something real. Francis had been right about the ground. He had been less right about his own longevity. He died of a heart attack in the spring of 1951, age 49, standing at the end of a row he had just finished planting, which is the kind of death that a farming man might have chosen if he had been given the option. The Delaney farm was 310 acres of russet Burbank potato ground, sold to processors in Alamosa and to buyers who drove out from Monte Vista. The farm had a stone foundation house that Francis had built in stages over 7 years, starting with the kitchen and the one bedroom and adding rooms as the farm made money, which it did in most years and did not in some. The house smelled of the particular damp that stone foundations hold through the summer, and of coffee, and of the dried herbs Agnes kept on a shelf above the sink, rosemary and thyme, grown in a window box she had brought from Kansas on the truck in 1932. The kitchen floor was poured concrete, cold underfoot until May, and cold again by October. The wooden table in the center of the kitchen had 6 chairs around it. Agnes's 3 children, Francis Jr. called Frank, born 1936, Louise, born 1938, and Thomas, born 1941, had all grown up at that table. By 1958, Frank was in Denver, working in construction. Louise had married and was in Pueblo. Thomas was 27 and working the farm alongside his mother, the 2 of them managing what Francis had built with the help of one part-time hand, Celestino Vigil, who had been with the farm since 1946, and who knew the valley ground the way the Delaneys had learned to know it, by long, patient attention. The window above the kitchen sink faced east, toward the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, which turn a particular dark red in the late afternoon when the sun is coming from the west and the air is clear, which it usually is in September. Agnes had watched those mountains from that window for 26 years. The coffee percolator on the counter went at 5 in the morning every day. The radio on the shelf played farm prices at 6 and the news at 7, and Agnes listened to both with the same expression, which was the expression of a woman who has learned to receive information without reacting to it before she knows what it means. Some of you know that expression. Some of you have sat in kitchens like that one, where the radio goes at 5:30 and the day is already running before the light is up. Francis's death in 1951 had not broken the farm. Agnes had broken it. That is to say, she had broken the part of it that needed breaking, the assumption that it would run itself if a man was in charge, and had rebuilt it with the understanding that it ran because she made it run, which is a thing that some people figure out quickly, and some people never figure out at all. By 1953, she was current on every payment. By 1955, the farm debt was down to a single note, a $5,800 operating loan she had taken from the Valley National Bank in Alamosa in 1953 to cover a year when the potato prices had gone flat. The loan officer at Valley National was a man named Russell Tate. Tate was 38 years old in 1958, well-dressed. The kind of man who wore his hat level and his suit pressed on a Tuesday morning in a valley town and made sure you noticed. He had been patient with the Delaney account through 1954 and 1955. By 1956, the patients had started sounding like something else. By 1957, it sounded like paperwork. By the summer of 1958, Agnes was 3 months behind on the note, the result of a late frost in April that took 20% of the crop before it was out of the ground, and a July price drop that took another 8 cents a hundredweight off what remained. Tate drove out to the farm on a Monday morning in September with a man from the bank's legal office named Croft, who carried a leather briefcase and said nothing the entire time he was there except his own name when he introduced himself. Tate sat at Agnes's kitchen table with a set of transfer documents and explained, in the same patient voice he had been using for 2 years, that the bank had extended every reasonable accommodation and that the outstanding balance was $5,800, and that the documents in front of her would transfer title of the farm to the bank in satisfaction of the debt, and that she and Thomas would have 60 days to make other arrangements. The documents were on the table. The pen was beside them. Thomas was standing near the kitchen door with his arms at his sides and his jaw set, and nothing to say. Because there was nothing to say. Because the numbers were what they were, and the note was what it was, and 3 months of missed payments did not become unmissed by the force of wanting them to be. Croft had his briefcase open. Tate had his hands folded on the table. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains were turning dark red through the east window, and Agnes Delaney was looking at the pen. Agnes had her hand on the edge of the table. She had not picked up the pen yet. She was looking at it the way a person looks at a thing they are not ready to touch, but have decided they must. Thomas was not going to be able to stop it. Celestino Vigil was in the north field, pulling vines, doing the thing the September morning asked him to do, because that was all any of them had left, doing the next thing the farm asked for and not thinking about what came after. Nobody at that table was going to do anything. Russell Tate had the law on his side and the paperwork and the patient voice. Croft had his briefcase. Agnes had her hand on the table edge and a pen she had not yet picked up. You know what that moment is, the moment when the thing is about to happen and every person present has already accepted that it is going to happen and nobody is moved. Where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. A truck had been parked on the county road at the north edge of the Delaney property since before 9. A gray GMC 1-ton, highway dusty. The man who had been leaning against the driver's door had been looking at the valley the way a man looks at something he is trying to understand. Not at the farm specifically, but at the whole of it. The flat open floor of the valley, the mountains on both sides, the quality of the September morning light that comes off the San Luis Valley in a way that is unlike any other light in the country. He was there because a location scout had told him the San Luis Valley was the most underused landscape in the American West. He had driven down from Alamosa that morning to see if the scout was right. He had pulled over because the farm caught his eye. The stone house, the straight rows of the potato fields, the mountains behind it all going red in the distance. He had been looking at it for 20 minutes. He saw the car from the bank pull into the drive at 9:15. He watched it. He watched the 2 men get out with their briefcase and their suits. He watched the way Agnes Delaney held the door open for them and the way her shoulders looked when she did it. The particular set of a person's shoulders when they are doing something they have been dreading for weeks. He pushed off the door of the truck. He came down the county road and into the drive at an easy pace, hat on, boots on the gravel, no particular hurry. He knocked on the kitchen door. 2 knocks, solid. Thomas opened it. Thomas looked at him. Thomas said nothing, because there was nothing to say and because the man standing at the door had a face that a good portion of the American population could identify without introduction. John Wayne came into the kitchen. The room went still. Tate looked up from the table. Croft stopped moving. Agnes had her hand still on the table edge, the pen still beside the documents, untouched. Wayne looked at the table. He looked at the documents. He looked at the pen. He reached down and picked it up. He put it in his shirt pocket. Tate said, "Sir, these are legal." Wayne looked at him. He did not raise his voice. "What does she owe?" Tate opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the documents on the table. The outstanding balance is $5,800, but the bank's position is that the loan has been. What does she owe? Tate said, $5,800. Wayne took out his checkbook. He used the kitchen table, standing, and he wrote for a moment in the silence of that kitchen with the coffee still on the counter and the herbs in the window box and the Sangre de Cristo Mountains going dark red through the east window. He put the check on the table. He looked at Croft. "Take your documents." He looked at Tate. "Send her attorney a full release by Friday." He did not wait for either of them to answer. He picked up the transfer documents himself, all of them, and held them out to Croft. Croft took them. Tate picked up the check. He looked at it for a long moment, the way a man looks at something that has ended an argument he thought he was winning. They left. Tate's car went back up the county road toward Monte Vista and disappeared. Agnes Delaney was still sitting at the table. Thomas had not moved from the kitchen door. Wayne set his hat on the table and pulled out a chair and sat down. He looked toward the east window and the mountains the way a man looks at something he came a long way to see. "I need 3 weeks," he said. "Open ground, mountain background, good light. Your fields are sitting empty between harvest and winter prep. I'd be in the way for 3 weeks, and then I'd be gone." He looked at her. "Call it a location fee. Call it whatever you need to call it." Agnes Delaney looked at him for a moment. She looked at the east window. She looked at her own hands on the table. She said, "The north fields are already pulled." He nodded. "That'll do fine." He did not stay much longer. He shook Thomas's hand at the door and walked back down the drive to the gray GMC and turned onto the county road and drove toward Alamosa without looking back. Celestino Vigil saw the truck pass from the north field. He did not know what had happened in the kitchen. He went back to pulling vines, because the day was still going and the field still needed working, and September does not stop for anything. Agnes Delaney did not lose the farm. The release came from Valley National on Thursday, 1 day ahead of when Wayne had said. She made every payment on the note from that point forward. The balance cleared in full by the spring of 1961. She kept farming until 1969, when Thomas took over the daily operation. Thomas ran the Delaney farm for 31 years after that. He expanded into sugar beets in 1965, added a second pivot irrigation line in 1972, and sold the farm in 1999 to a cooperative out of Alamosa at a price that made the $5,800 note look like what it was. The entirety of nothing, in the long arithmetic of things, set out what that check bought. $5,800 on a September morning in 1958. Agnes farmed 11 more years after that morning. Thomas farmed 31 years more after her. That is 42 years of potato ground and sugar beet ground and pivot, irrigation lines on land that would have transferred to Valley National. Bank before noon on a Monday morning, if a man in a gray truck had not stopped on the county road because the light coming off the mountains looked the way the scout said it would. 42 years. 42 springs with seed going into that valley ground. Thomas's daughter, Renee, who grew up in the stone house and went to Colorado State in Fort Collins on an agricultural scholarship, and came back to the valley to work in water management for the San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District, where she is still working today. Celestino Vigil came to that farm every morning for 23 more years after 1958, until he retired in 1981. 3 grandchildren who know the Sangre de Cristo Mountains at sunrise the way Agnes Delaney learned them in 1932. That is what $5,800 becomes when it arrives at the right kitchen table at the right moment. Agnes Delaney kept the pen. It was a black Esterbrook fountain pen, the kind common in bank offices in the late 1950s. Russell Tate had left it on the table when the documents were taken. Agnes put it in the kitchen drawer beside the sink, and it sat there for the rest of her life without ever being used. In the stone house on the Delaney farm, the one Thomas still owns, the one his daughter grew up in, there is a shelf in the kitchen beside the east window. On it there is a glass jar holding the pen, capped. The Esterbrook clip still bright, as if it were waiting. Next to it there is a photograph taken in the fall of 1958, not long after, showing Agnes standing in the north field with the mountains behind her, looking at the camera the way a woman looks when she knows what almost happened and is not done with the fact of it. Thomas framed the photograph himself after Agnes died in 1987. He put it on the shelf beside the pen. The afternoon light comes through that east window every day in September and lies across the shelf and the jar and the photograph for a while before it moves off to the west. The mountains still go dark red when the light is right. The valley ground is still planted. The pivot lines Thomas put in still run their circles in the summer. If you drive south out of Monte Vista on the Alamosa County Road, 22 miles down you will see a stone house set back from the road on the east side, with a gravel drive and a line of old cottonwoods along the north fence. The east window faces the mountains. The pen is on the shelf. It has not moved in more than 60 years. If you have ever known someone who held on the way Agnes Delaney held on, who kept making payments as long as payments could be made, and asked nothing from anyone, and sat at a table ready to sign away everything she had built, because the numbers said she had to, this story is for them. John Wayne never told anyone what he did on that Monday morning in September of 1958. Not in an interview, not on a set, not in any letter that has surfaced. He mentioned the San Luis Valley location in a production conversation that same fall, describing the light as better than anything his crew had found in Arizona that year. He did not mention the kitchen. He did not mention the pen. There are men who understand that the only correct response to witnessing the right thing is to do it before the moment passes, and then to say nothing about it afterward, because the saying would diminish the doing, and the doing was the whole point. He understood that. He acted on it. He kept the pen. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. There are more like it, and unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.